Welcome to our inspiring journey through the realms of leadership, sustainability, and the future of business. My name is Sajid, and today we have the privilege of hosting a luminary in the world of corporate sustainability, Mr. Shai Ganu. Shai doesn't just read the winds of change, he sets the sail for a better tomorrow. As the managing director and global leader for executive compensation and board advisory business at Willis Towers Watson, Shai's vision extends beyond the horizon of traditional business practices. His expertise weaves through the intricate tapestry of executive leadership, navigating the complex dynamics of our global ecosystem. Moreover, Shai, your role is not in one, two, but three esteemed climate-related organizations: the Global Governing Board of Climate Governance Initiative, the Climate Governance Singapore, and the Asian Climate Governance Network. This places you in this very special position, a vanguard of climate governance. He's a modern-day steward of our Earth, a title he upholds with every strategic move and decision. As a member of the World Economic Forum's Climate Governance Global Community of Experts, he's a voice that echoes in the halls where the future of our planet is shaped. With his wealth of experience on boards and committees in leading companies and not-for-profits across Southeast Asia, and as a fellow and governing council member of the Singapore Institute of Directors, chairing the ESG committee, Shai's commitment to sustainable leadership shines as a beacon for hope for others to follow. Let's start with sustainable business practices, the path to people, profits, and planet. So Shai, my very first question would be, in a world where market's invisible hand seems cold to the environmental needs, why are businesses increasingly looking to adopt practices that promote sustainability? In your view, what's driving this shift towards a more eco-conscious corporate world?
Thank you, Sarjeet. And hello, everybody. Thank you for making the time. Please don't believe a word he said. He's being extremely kind in his introductions. Not at all. We all are doing our part to help further the cause of climate governance. And increasingly, I think there is a growing body of consciousness that this climate crisis, we cannot leave it to government alone. Increasingly, we have to have public-private partnerships, and consequently the role of corporations, and in particular the role of the boards, becomes fundamentally important. So it was very uncomfortable listening to you share those beautiful words. Very kind of you, thank you. But we're all stewards, and as stewards, our role is to protect and enhance value for the future. As stewards, we are custodians of assets that are entrusted to us, and assets that are entrusted to us, we don't own. We don't own planet Earth. We don't own its resources. We are benefiting from it right now, but it's our responsibility to protect and enhance value for the future. So I just want to start by that, and then I'll answer your question. I also appreciate the discussion around climate change has dialed up a couple of notches in the recent past. And partly sort of this outcry that we need to save the planet. Let's all be very clear. We are doing, this is not about saving the planet. The planet was here before humanity. The planet will be here after humanity. Everything we're doing is to save ourselves. It's to save humanity. Before sort of Homo sapiens walked on the earth, the planet still existed. After we stop, the planet will still exist. What we're trying to do is make sure that this home of ours, this blue dot, stays as a home for much longer and as a more habitable and equitable place for all of us. And why the equitable is important, Shajit, and you and I have had these conversations in the past. Climate issues, people see climate or this broad umbrella of ESG as they see them as three different buckets: an environmental bucket, a social bucket, and a governance bucket. But there is so much research about how these are fundamentally intertwined. And I'll just take one example. Environmental issues are a very big driver of social issues. With global temperatures rising and sort of conditions or precedents of extreme heat conditions, who do you think that impacts the most? That negatively impacts most the underprivileged and impoverished part of society that don't have the same resources that the rest of the population might have. And there have been so many examples that actually environmental issues, extreme weather conditions further propel or further divide social inequity, because the people who are most vulnerable tend to be the biggest victims of any climate change issues. So that I think is something why we are all doing what we do, including the World Economic Forum, including the work at the Singapore Institute of Directors, and organizations. Conversations like this are important so that we can raise the collective consciousness. And then the final point I'll make just very quickly, you spoke about why our business is doing this. I perhaps should have started with this, but I dare say I might end with this. I'm a very big believer that human beings, organizations, for truly long-lasting change, we must realize business benefits that come out of it. And what I mean by that is, quite often people get on their soapboxes that say that we're doing this because we want the world a better place for the next generation. We are doing this as in climate action out of a moral, because it's something to do. Moral imperative is admirable, but moral imperatives do not make long-lasting change. For change to be truly long-lasting, companies must recognize the business benefits that come out of this. And so what spurred the action in the last couple of years? Number one, definitely a much stronger sense of urgency on this topic. Number two, the science has evolved. So in the past, where you would have had a sort of equal dose of climate deniers and climate change proponents, now the science is irrefutable. And number three, companies are realizing that this makes good business sense. And happy to talk about what that business sense is later on. But unless companies spend significant amount of their cranial and financial resources to think about how do they decarbonize their supply chains, how do they further go on the path of energy transition, it is going to hurt them in the long run. So this is, let's all be clear, people are not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing this because it makes good business sense.
Well said. I've coined the word to describe what you shared, mental distance versus mental proximity. So when you are further away from the effects of climate change,
Indeed.
It becomes less of an issue for you.
Indeed.
And that's the concern. The more developed countries are probably having a mental distance from the issues of the day. I would like to move on to another question on this, Shai. In your role across the various climate governance bodies, could you share some insights and some specific challenges that companies face in this regard? And how are they balancing the scales of profit and planetary well-being?
I'm a consultant, so I like answering questions with a question. So maybe a pop quiz even for your viewers. Let's say the 100 largest institutions, or let me rephrase that, the 100 wealthiest institutions in the world. How many of them do you think are companies versus how many of them are countries?
I really don't know the answer to that, but I guess would it be about the same?
Around 60, or 2/3 roughly, are companies.
I see.
And only around 30 or 40% are countries.
Okay.
So what does that tell us? That tells us that, again, if you just rely on governments, as well-intentioned as they might be, and we are very fortunate that we live in Singapore that has a far more progressive government, but it is very clear that for change to happen, it does need public-private partnerships. And if you take that notion that 2/3 of the wealthiest institutions are companies, companies need to get behind this.
Absolutely.
Right? It can't just be left to policymakers and sort of regulatory bodies. And that's the backdrop, I guess, to answer your question. The different climate governance bodies, and I've been fortunate to be associated with some of them, I think it's a very clear mandate that to drive this change, the tone must be set at the top. at the very top of the organization, at the boards of directors, in jurisdictions that have a unitary board structure, i.e. a board of directors and management, it must start with the board of directors and then cascade down to management and rest. The principles that you do this with, the World Economic Forum, we spent a time trying to define what we're calling the principles of climate governance. And there are 8 principles of climate governance. It's accountability of the board. It's command of the subject, i.e. if you have board members who are trying to deal with climate issues, they must know what climate issues are. They must be at least climate literate, if not climate experts. Number 3 is the structure of the board. So do you set up separate sustainability committees? What is the role of the board versus management? Then you talk about risk and material risk issues. And fundamentally, climate risk is a financial risk. And I'll give you an example on what I mean by that. A client of mine had a factory by the banks of a river. And they were using the river for access to water, clean water, but then also as transportation to get their dry bulk goods.
Understand.
Climate change changed the course of the river. The river ran dry. They had to shut down that factory. Now, who suffers here? Of course, planet Earth is suffering, but shareholders are also suffering because you have to write off that asset. So material risk issues, and specifically on climate risk, we talk about physical risks, the example I mentioned, but also transition risk, as in the risk associated with transitioning your business models. Then you get into integration. So finishing the principles, number 5 is integration, and specifically strategic and operational integration. So everything needs to be aligned. Number 6 is a personal favorite, incentivization, i.e. use incentives and KPIs for management to drive change. Number 7 being reporting and disclosures, and number 8 being exchange. And these 8 principles set the bedrock of any governance framework that you would use for climate governance.
Well said. You know, there are lots of success stories.
Yeah.
And they resonate like legends in the corporate world,
Yeah.
I would say. Could you share some of the tales of businesses that not only reached the summit of sustainability, but also planted flags for others to follow?
Yeah. What a very good question, Sajid. And I like the flags for others to follow, but there is also another one that is wise person learns from other people's mistakes. So you don't learn by making the same mistakes yourself. And yes, there have been trailblazers who've sort of planted flags, but also learned lessons that others have built on. And I'll mention a couple of these examples. All of these are public domain. One that comes to mind immediately is an organization called Patagonia. You might have heard of this. Patagonia is an outdoor adventure and apparel gear company in the US.
Yes.
Patagonia is famous, and if you go to its website right now, it actually says, the tagline as soon as you go on the website, it says, "Our only is the earth." Wow. They've actually changed their legal structure. So Patagonia started by every year donating 1% for environmental issues. Then they set up a B corporation. Now the current corporate structure is they have voting stock, non-voting stock, and part of it is in a trust. All profits that the company makes goes to the trust, and the trust is used for climate action issues. So basically, the founder gave up the company and said, okay, we want to drive climate issues. And I think that's a very powerful example of putting your money where your mouth is. Yep. And I also appreciate that when we talk about sustainability, often it is beyond just climate. It is also around social issues. This still gives me goosebumps thinking about this, but Unilever has been at the forefront of a lot of sustainability and driving the sustainability actions. Unilever had an initiative called Project Shakti. Shakti in sort of the Hindi means power. And Project Shakti was set up in India as a way of providing livelihoods empowerment to women in rural India. Women in rural India generally came from fairly low-income groups. And what Project Shakti is Unilever started giving these women access to their goods so that they would resell them within the villages and earn income in the villages, right? And again, I say this over and over. The really successful companies understand the business benefit from this. So this may not have been their main, but one of the business benefits was it gave Unilever a additional sales channel. So you're not just relying on your typical wholesalers and retailers. These women were also selling their soaps and shampoos and other products within the villages. It gave the women additional income. And the beautiful part of this, Sharjit, is it changed the socio-economic pecking order. This wonderful video, viewers are interested, check it out on YouTube. There's this video that shows a woman, very proud, sort of with her role in the village, a woman walking first, behind her husband, behind the husband is the husband's mother, so the woman's mother-in-law, and then the husband's sister, so her sister-in-law. And the four of them is walking down the street of the village, and people are shouting and saying hello and saying, how are you, etc. That would never happen. Because if you think about the social structures in those villages, it's the man first, then the mother-in-law, then the sister-in-law, and last the wife. But this was such a beautiful example that through empowerment, through access to healthcare and health products and additional sources of income, and I thought that's such a powerful example.
Well said. This is a true example of let us shine.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I spent hours on a case study on Unilever just recently, not long ago, and it was at Harvard Business School, and it was something that resonated with a lot of my fellow classmates as well. And it was interesting because this story that you just shared has also shown us that, when we look at sustainability, we also have so much other positives about women empowerment and issues that we have taken years to deal with.
Absolutely.
People often say, sustainability is a journey, not a destination. With the growing need for green finance professionals, both in Singapore and globally, how do we chart this course? What skills are the compass and maps for these new explorers?
Yes, definitely. This is an area that is getting prominence, a lot more mobility within the talent pools. I'll perhaps answer this in a couple of buckets. A lot of the climate action and what's driving this demand can be attributed to two major forces.
Okay.
One force is probably regulatory change.
Understand.
When market makers, regulators, stock exchanges say thou must, people have to fall in line. The other is driven by, again, as I mentioned, the commercial opportunity. And the commercial opportunity, i.e. access to green assets or exposure to green assets, helping investment mandates, helping flow of capital. Point, and I'll give you a small example on this. I was fortunate enough to do some of this work before it became fashionable. So I remember doing this back in 2017, 2018 with a European chemical company. And we were working very closely with the board, and they decided to set a carbon emission reduction goal. And not just that, they also set 20% of the CEO's, part of the CEO's compensation to this carbon emission reduction. Now, being a European company, any changes to compensation models you have to disclose. So this was disclosed, that 20% linked to carbon emission reduction. And what we want to test was, how does the market react to this as a listed company? And so we worked very deliberately with the investor relations team to plan the announcement during a window where no other announcements were planned, because we didn't want other biases to impact this. And we just were curious what happens with the share price. Over that, since the announcement, over the next 3 months, the share price actually went up by 8%. Nothing else changed. No other announcements about results, etc., etc. And when we dug a bit deeper, why? Is till that point, some of the very large pension funds had not invested in this company because it did not align with their sustainability investment objectives or sustainability mandate. but this clear signal of energy transition or carbon transition, I should say, and clear signal of putting the money where their mouth is, they felt, okay, now this qualifies as a sustainable investment and more capital can flow here. So again, regulatory or commercial need. And so that's on the one hand driving the demand. Even in Singapore, and Singapore is such a great sort of case study or microcosm of what's happening globally. Even in Singapore, quite a few organizations, all our major banks here provide discounted loans.
Yeah.
If you set your own sustainability goals and you meet them, so the bank is not even prescribing what the goal should be. And it can add up because even if you get a few bips sort of discounted loans, that's not insignificant. And so the demand is very much being driven through these external actions. The supply side, which is also part of your question, I think the fundamental skill set is, I would say, an extension or an adjacency to the current skill set. And not just talking about green finance professionals, but sustainability professionals generally.
Yeah.
A lot of them came from accounting backgrounds, which is not a bad, it's actually a very, very good starting point. But the really progressive ones have spent enough time trying to upskill themselves quickly on what the climate issues are. And like they say, this is the classic Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Dunning-Kruger, these two scientists said, and proved empirically actually, that the more you understand about a subject, the more you realize how little you know about it.
Correct. Absolutely.
And this has been my experience on my sustainability journey.
Absolutely.
The more you spend on this, more, holy, like there's so much more to unpack. So if any of your green finance professionals, sustainability professionals, kudos that sort of you are working in a sector that is making an impact, but also is in high demand. But B, keep your pencil sharpened because the industry is also evolving.
I like that part about keeping your pencils sharpened.
Yeah.
You know, learning to learn is far more valuable
Absolutely.
than learning a new skill or learning technology. They say it's an attitude.
Absolutely.
And you need both passion. You have passion and commitment, magic happens, right?
Indeed.
So,
Indeed.
all of you out there, remember, it's not just having the right, but also having a passion in this area.
Absolutely.
I want to move on to the last question for today. And this is an area, you know, much talked about today because 10 years ago, the survey was done. They asked CEOs, what was the number one risk? And the answer to that question was climate risk.
Yeah.
2 years ago, top risk wasn't climate risk, it was misinformation and greenwashing.
Yes.
In an era where misinformation, greenwashing can muddy the waters of genuine sustainability efforts, how can companies and consumers navigate these challenges?
It's such an important question, right? Greenwashing. So just for the benefit of all your viewers, greenwashing is when companies make a claim about their sustainability and specifically their climate priorities, and that claim is not substantiated by action. So they say more than they do. And why is that a risk? Is in some cases could be illegal, but there have also been several cases of people, of very large companies getting very large fines because of misrepresentation, because of greenwashing. One of the largest investment banks globally, I think, got a several $100 million fine because it was claiming that some of its investments were ESG investments, whereas when you dug a bit deeper, they weren't really sort of meeting all the requirements. It's caused companies to be rightfully so paying attention on closing the disconnect between what they're saying and actually doing.
Yes.
So that's good. Now, as they say, there's always two sides to every story, right? And or rather, unintended consequences of punitive actions. One of the unintended consequences of some of these punitive actions is not greenwashing, but is actually green hushing.
Yes.
Which it's a term that I know we both are very familiar with. Green hushing is when a company is actually doing a lot of good things, but they're scared to talk about it, lest somebody sues them or lest some other things happen. So it is greenwashing, green hushing, green shushing, green bashing. It's a whole taxonomy or whole sort of myriad of terms there. But I guess the key points that companies and your viewers should keep in mind is um, it is really important, particularly for companies, to ensure alignment. Alignment between actions and the narrative, alignment between board and management, alignment between short term and long term. And a lot of this is about striking the right balance. One of your earlier questions, you asked about sort of this balance between profits and purpose or sustainability agenda. Quite often I get asked this question, Shai, what is more important, purpose or profits?
Yep.
And every time I hear that question, I first of all smile and I say, what is more important, purpose or profits? The answer is yes. If that both are important, not one or the other, right? And it's actually not the right question to ask. The right question to ask is what is more important, short-term profits or long-term profits? Because if you focus on a decarbonization roadmap, very likely you're going to have to make investments in the short term that can impact your profitability now. But you quite literally and figuratively are sowing seeds for the future that can help you in the long term. So for your viewers, I would strongly encourage to focus on sort of the actions that you're taking, focus on a very clear strategy. And perhaps this could be a good way of wrapping up, I guess, some of our thoughts. I've used some of these phrases enough that my family has actually started calling them Shai-isms because I use these phrases a lot. But if you would indulge with me, just maybe 2 or 3 thoughts I'll leave with you. If you take nothing else out of today, perhaps this. Number 1, ESG is not equal to CSR, right? ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues, is not equal to CSR, corporate social responsibility. You would be surprised, Rajit, the number of times very senior executives, when I'm talking to them about their sustainability actions, they say, oh, yeah, we give our employees 2 days leave to plant trees.
Yeah.
That's great, but plant trees does not make a sustainability strategy, right? The difference between ESG or sustainability and CSR is corporate social responsibility or CSR is what you do with the profits that you earn. ESG or sustainability strategy is how you earn the profits to begin with.
Yes.
And there is a difference there. So number 1, ESG is not equal to CSR. Number 2, ESG is the main course. That it's not a side dish. It's not something to do on the side. It's not, let's just check the box. It's not the appetizer. It's not the dessert. It is the main course. By that I mean, is it truly successful companies, they have embedded the core part of their business as a core part of the strategy. It's not a compliance activity, it's not a check the box, it's the way they do business. Number 3 is think long but act short. And what I mean by that is quite often your sustainability roadmaps, and particularly your carbon road, they tend to have long aspirations. Reduction of emissions by 50% by 2030 or net zero by 2050. These are long-term goals. And of course, it's important to have long-term visions, but break them down into actionable items. Right? A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So
Absolutely.
break it into single steps. Number 4, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And what I mean by that is, again, in any governance mechanism, board members, management, we are conditioned to have all the answers, to have a playbook, to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. With climate science and climate governance in particular, things are evolving. So just because you don't have all the answers doesn't mean you shouldn't be asking the questions. And number 5, and this is my favorite, and you've heard me say this before, so please indulge with me again. I'm a little bit of a movie buff, and one of my favorite movies is The Godfather, right? And in The Godfather, there's this very famous line. It's not personal, it's strictly business. And that's how we need to be thinking about sustainability issues. It's not personal. We're not doing this solely out of the goodness of their hearts. Companies who are doing this well are doing this because it makes business sense, because it's strictly business.
Shai, indeed, your journey, your insights are like a lighthouse guiding ships through foggy waters of uncertainty and towards a sustainable shore. So,
Yeah.
your contributions remind me of the words of Margaret Mead. Never doubt how a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Thank you for being one of those citizens for this planet and for joining us today. Tremendous pleasure
No,
having you on board.
Thank you for volunteering your time and helping further this conversation. It's conversations like this that will help all of us raise our collective consciousness so that we can make a real impact. So thank you.
Thank you.